moment. So if you're here and you want to say hello, please introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to take your questions and actually get a conversation going about this. Alrighty.
Oh, Ivy's here. Hooray.
Yeah. Hi, Ivy.
I'm just looking to see how I can see the chat. Oh, I see.
Okay. Thanks for saying hi. Okay. Alrighty. All right. So we are live on Facebook. Hello, everybody in Facebook land and beyond. I'm here with Pamela Samuelson. I'm Eva Clay, if you don't know me. We are going to talk today about closing the pleasure gap. And I honestly can't think of anyone I'd rather be having this conversation with than Pamela. Pamela is an absolute rock star, and I'm going to say more about her in a minute. But first, I want to just let you know that we're going to cover 3, at least, ways that women can close the pleasure gap and claim their orgasm and their sexual pleasure. There are startling statistics that seem to always come forward about the different rates and frequency at which men and women experience orgasm and sexual pleasure in heterosexual relationships. And I know, as a sex therapist, I hear this all the time, like really day in and day out, how women are frustrated, they've had it up to here with their male sexual partners, either not knowing or not caring about their orgasm. And they literally come to me, I hear this every day, and they say, either he doesn't know or he just doesn't care. What do I do? So we're going to address this question. Pam, I know that you hear a lot about this in your practice as well. Do you want to say a few words about that?
Sure. Because I'm working hands-on with people in my practice, I'm primarily seeing people with vulvas, and I'm primarily seeing people with vulvas who are having issues, or else they wouldn't be coming to me of one kind or another, whether that is preparation for birth or postnatal care, after a birth injury, or some sort of other discomfort or distress. A lot of the time, the reason that people are coming in is because they specifically are having what has been diagnosed by someone or has been termed by themselves as a sexual dysfunction. And I am finding that pretty often a lot of what constitutes their dysfunction is just that their partner isn't actually paying attention to them. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it is more complex than that, but often also it's just a pattern of having been disregarded by previous partners that's sort of carrying forward, even if a partner is interested, that they feel like they're broken, or they feel like they don't know what they like, or they can't experience pleasure, something like this. So it's a lot of, I think, unlearning around that and coming back to just like a gentle inquiry into the body itself to ask what it likes, what feels good, which is a really simple inquiry, actually, even when there is something that has felt debilitating for many years going on.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that, and I find the same, but I just want to reiterate this so that if there are any women who are watching this, might find some solution and some insight around this. You're saying that women come into you for some kind of dysfunction, quote unquote, either pain during intercourse or inability to experience orgasm or diminished pleasure, diminished libido. And what you discover through your work together is that it's actually that their partner's not paying enough attention to them.
Often, not always, of course. Sometimes there is a hormonal imbalance issue or scar tissue or something else going on, but I'm working with a significant number of women who have a pretty intense trauma history of one kind or another, and that plays in, I think, a lot to how women experience pleasure and what they feel like they can ask for, like what role they feel like they can play, what role is available to them sexually.
Absolutely. And I know I had this experience myself years ago when I was much younger in experiencing low libido in a marriage. And I went through all the channels of Western medicine to try and figure out what was wrong with my libido. And, it was always my problem. But as right, but as Esther Perel says, and I love how she talks about this, that it's often not just that there's something wrong with a woman, that she doesn't want sex. She doesn't want the sex that's being offered.
Right.
Right. And many women don't know that there's an alternative, that there's a different way, and that they are being driven into this patriarchal, male-oriented dimension of sexuality, and it just isn't working for their body.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's very frequently a misunderstanding about the arc of arousal and orgasm in women, and that it is expected to be the same as a male arc, and it's just not. Like, that's actually not how we work. So it's worth talking about and educating about that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So that brings me to our first point. First point that we had talked about, the one of the most important ways that women can begin to close the pleasure gap and claim their pleasure, claim their orgasm, and claim equality when it comes to heterosexual sex. And that is self-awareness, which I feel is linked very closely to education. So understanding your own arousal, understanding your own body, and understanding that it's not necessarily going to look like the male arousal system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I hear frequently is that women feel like they're taking too long.
Yeah.
And that's the source of shame, or a real deep source of embarrassment, that they feel like they have to move at a pace that's actually not their right pace. Like, there is a script that they are expected to conform to around a certain rate or a certain speed, or it should look a particular way, and it leads us away, as I think happens to women frequently, just in the culture that we are in and are continuing to create, where aesthetic is valued over sensation. That it's supposed to be something, and therefore, because it's not that, it's a problem, and you are a problem.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And this might be a good time to qualify your comments on this topic. Pamela is a sexological bodyworker. She's a pelvic health specialist, a researcher, an activist, and, as I like to call her, a badass fucking witch. I love this woman. And she is going to be co-teaching with me in the Path to Pleasure program, which is all about this. This is really all about women coming to understand their bodies and learning how to speak up and speak out for their pleasure. And that entails getting to know what really turns you on, and where does your pleasure live in your body? How do we map that? How do we tap into the texture of your erotic imagination? And we go into all of that in depth in the Path to Pleasure program. So I'm going to leave a link for that when we're done here. So I'm really happy to have Pamela as one of our teachers in the course. So this lady knows what she's talking about. So key number one, get to know yourself and give yourself permission to take your time. Pam, do you have anything to add about how long it typically takes? Like, what does the science tell us about how long it takes for women's arousal to really begin to build and for the body to become engorged?
I mean, it varies enormously from body to body, of course, and it varies from experience to experience and from partner to partner, but often I've heard upwards of half an hour, 45 minutes, could be an hour. It could, for some people, be very quick. There is as many different versions of arousal as there are human beings. So I think it depends a great deal, but I think the important thing is to know that it can take that long, and that there is no reason on earth to rush.
Yes. Thank you. Yes.
I think also just exploring arousal for oneself without a partner is super important in coming to understand what is possible, what is sort of the natural flow, the natural shape of arousal for you, so that you can then have some sort of metric and some sort of guidance to offer to a partner about what it is that you like.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I like to tell women, I read a study, and this has kind of been replicated a lot and highly publicized, that it takes on average 30 to 45 minutes for a woman to become fully engorged and ready for penetration. And this is about right. I like to float that number out there because I do find that it gives women permission. And, you know, how that arousal comes, like if it's foreplay, if it's just speaking with your partner, if it's communication, if it's, you know, however that arrives for you, as you say, whatever the shape of that is for you, to know that that is a normal amount of time.
Right.
Yeah. Normal and acceptable.
Yeah.
So I get this question all the time from women. So what does she say to a partner who wants to rush in and penetrate and who's in, you know, the linear goal orientation of get in, get the job done, and finish, which is like a word that I hate that people use when it comes to sex. I want to have you finished, or I want to finish. How can we support women in like extricating themselves from that model?
I think there's a conversation. I mean, what I find to be the most effective with women who are partnered with men is to have a conversation when you're not in bed, when this is not like in the moment of it, to just talk about the different ways that it can go and the different paths that it can take, and to propose a model of sex that might be more interesting. It might be more fun. It might be more spacious and more permissive for both partners. Um, and I don't know, for me, the conversation that happens around like either he doesn't know or he doesn't care. If he doesn't know but he wants to know, that's one thing. If he doesn't care, don't keep sleeping with that person. He doesn't deserve to be your lover. He doesn't deserve to enjoy your body, the glory of your body, if he doesn't care how it feels for you. So don't fuck that person.
It's as simple as those 4 words.
Don't fuck that person.
Don't fuck that person.
Don't feel right. Don't fuck it.
Yeah. I wish it were that simple. I wish it were. I have women who come to me who've been married for upwards of 20 years and have literally like never really felt like their feminine body, that their feminine eros was met by their husband. So let's give them some really concrete tools, Pamela. So when you talk about like have this conversation outside of the bedroom, which is so great, and propose a different way of lovemaking, a different way of connecting. Can we give some words to this? Like how might a woman open that conversation with her man?
Well, the words that I like to use are exchange and enjoyment and learning, and I want you to show me and I want to show you. And sometimes a proposal to a partner of like, this is just going to be all about you tonight, and then on another night it's going to be all about me and I'm going to show you everything, and just to make it tantalizing, to make it an invitation rather than a kind of a description of a failure, to make it a sort of beautiful invitation to learn and to please you, like to learn what it is that works really well for you.
Mm-hmm. So the phrase that we throw around a lot in sex educator communities is, "What I would love is."
Oh, that's great.
To have a conversation with your partner over breakfast, over coffee, and say, like, what I would love is if we could take turns and have what I call it temple night. Temple night, where I adore your body with no expectation of anything in return. And then we switch.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love for my body to be adored by you.
Mm-hmm.
And would you be open to hearing what I love and what turns me on? So I'm a hopeless flirt. And so I like to make it flirtatious with your partner, even if you've been married for many, many, many years and have have a couple children in the home. Flirt with your partner and, invoke a sense of playfulness and curiosity about each other's body. And that begins to turn the tide, to turn the tonality, and like I said, the texture of your erotic relationship.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's important to process the disappointment or the feelings about it with people other than one's partner too.
Mm-hmm.
So that it doesn't become a litany of complaints. And so there is that space for invitation and flirtation and to really turn the tone of it into something that can bloom into a more fulfilled sexual connection.
I love that. Yes. Come to someone like me, a sex therapist. or Pamela.
Or even a really close friend who understands, like anyone really, who will have sympathy for that situation and for both players in that situation is, I think, the most helpful.
Mm-hmm. That's such a good suggestion. Okay, so key number 2 would be skillfully communicate what you need and what you love. Now, here's a different kind of angle of this, and I really want to help these single ladies. I have a lot of single women who come to me, and maybe they're sort of in hookup culture, they're having casual sex, and they're like aghast with how rare it is that a lover, a casual lover, actually cares or inquires about their orgasm or about their pleasure, what they want and what they need and what they love. And so more and more I've been hearing about women doing this. And I actually read an article that like Nicki Minaj, who I don't really follow pop culture, but she famously quoted in a magazine that she doesn't leave the bed until she has an orgasm. So she tells her lover, like, we're not done. Like, you're done, but I'm not done. And you need to get to business. Like, you need to get to work on me. And I recently had an interview with a woman who also is a fairly high profile woman. I won't name her name, but she said that she brings her toys with her when she has casual sex. And that if she doesn't feel satisfied or pleased by the encounter, she'll whip a toy out. And, she talks about how her male partners get offended by that. And some are intrigued, but most of them are quite offended. So how do we help single women to navigate this?
Well, I think that an upfront and straightforward conversation about sex should happen pretty soon into a first date. If that is where it's going, if that's where, if that's the intention of the date, if it is about hooking up, then to start talking about it early on, which I find builds a certain amount of turn on just even in the conversation, but also gives the person that you're on a date with a heads up about where this is headed and what is expected. That it's not about being taken or being used or, having something taken as a woman from you on a casual date, but actually that you're there for your own reasons and that you want certain things to happen and what those certain things might be. So just to clue the guy in. And also I find in that conversation, it becomes clear, I think, early on, if that is discussed, whether he's into it. If he's not into it, and he's actually not particularly interested in what you want and what you would like, then it's probably not a good person to take to bed.
Yeah. I always say the exact same thing. This is really, really key for women. It's like, what happens before sex? And who is the person that you're getting ready to make love with? So I think one thing is really important now, especially with what's going on with dating apps and hookup culture, is that as women, if we're having sex with men, or we identify as heterosexual women and we're having sex with men, that we take responsibility for our experience. And I find that a lot of women I work with kind of lay back and expect him to know it all or to do it right or to get it right. When in actuality, we're not taking enough time before we even enter an encounter with somebody to have a conversation and say, what are your expectations,
right,
of this experience and afterwards? And what will you need from me after? And can I ask for something I want after in terms of follow-up? Can I set some limits and some boundaries with this experience? And these are the things I'm definitely going to want. I'm going to want you to wear a condom. I'm going to want you to go down on me for 45 minutes. I'm going to want you to, I just throw that in. But to have those preemptive conversations and really clear the decks. And I find that when that happens, women have a much more expansive experience. This is much more pleasurable and liberated because they're not laying there with the wheels turning and the wondering and the hoping and the craving. So yeah, to really take responsibility for your experience. If you're going to choose, if you're discerning and you're a yes to go into a sexual encounter with somebody, put down on paper beforehand, or like make a kind of creed or an oath to yourself about what are the points you need to cover in order for you to go into this experience feeling liberated and embodied and empowered.
Yeah. how to have an experience that's going to make you feel better and not worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that Reed Mahalko talks about.
Mm.
A class with him at the Pleasure Test many, many years ago. And one of the great gems that I took out of that conversation was his description of the 2-minute elevator speech, where if you, and you can extrapolate this into whatever actually makes the most sense given the situation, but just that pretty much off the bat, upon determining that you're interested, to tell the person everything that they might need to know about you sexually to know if they might be interested. And if they're not, then you've established that, and you're not going to mess around with it further. But upon establishing some rapport with that person and some agreement, then there might be somewhere good to go, which to me is the distinction between consent, which is the giving of permission for someone to do what they want to you, and the establishing of agency, which is that you're sort of in this together as a collaborator.
I love that distinction. Can you say that again?
Yeah, it's the distinction between consent, which the dictionary definition is giving permission to do something that they want to you, presumably in this situation, and agency, which is establishing that you have a will and a desire of your own and things that you would like to happen and the way that you would like for those things to happen, and to come into the conversation as a collaborator rather than someone who is being done to or taken from.
Yeah, so let's jam on that as our third and final point about agency, and that I call this erotic mindset. I think that so many women today are still operating from this mindset of I lay back and he does his thing to me.
Yeah.
And it's disempowering for everybody, and men as well, because it puts if they're having sex with men, it puts a lot of pressure on him to perform, and then they're ignorant. They're not aware really of the female arousal process. So I really believe that this happens at the level of culture, shifting the sexual culture. And so one thing that Pamela and I talked about before this in discussing our key points was how important it is for there to be a context of safety and permission for women to assert themselves. And that women's pleasure is equally important to a male pleasure. And so how do we go about shifting this cultural mindset? And how do we then embody that? It's a big question. I'm just throwing questions out here. And what are the practices that embolden and empower women to make a stand for their pleasure?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with education. The sex ed that we receive as young people is entirely bereft of any discussion of female pleasure, and you're considered a heretic and a radical if you even bring it up.
Yeah.
Which is why I quit Planned Parenthood many, many years ago. I was teaching ninth graders. And really wanted to talk, and did talk about it. And then at a certain point was like, this is absurd. Why isn't this just a given in the curriculum? I felt like I was being, it was, and that's true for men too. Men are not taught about how to be a good lover and be a good partner. It was routine with 14-year-olds in the room that they would ask. I would get to take anonymous questions at the end of each class that they would say, how can I be a good lover for my girl? And I'd say, you ask her what she wants and then you do that. And that makes you a good lover. And they were 14, so it's where are the places where that conversation is happening, and how can we make that more of a normal part of sex ed, so that it's not just about the fear of the adults teaching it and the real underpinning desire of all of the conversation that kids not be having sex. And so we make it sound really scary. It's all about pregnancy and STDs and all of the terrible things that could happen if you do it, and leaves out all of the part of why we are doing it in the first place, which is that it feels good. And it should feel good for everyone, that there's a place for everyone in that it's not about things being taken from bodies with vulvas by bodies with penises, but that it's an act of sharing and mutuality at its best. So that's a big thing. I think Nicki Minaj saying that she doesn't leave the bed until she comes is great, because a lot of people read that and it changes their mind in some deep and subtle way, and maybe changes the way that they're engaging with their partners.
Yeah, absolutely. I also worked for Planned Parenthood, by the way, and as a sex educator. Yeah, I did. Yeah, years ago. And I actually wasn't allowed to say the word sex. So I would go into middle schools and take over the sex education classes for 7th, 8th, and 9th graders. And I wasn't allowed to say the word sex. It was crazy. But so I'm sympathizing with you there. I've been in that machine also. It's a good thing we're off-roading now.
Yeah. I mean, just to say, California, we're in one of the most liberal states in the nation, and even so, it's really very lacking. You know, it's better than in many places where it's abstinence only, but it's still very incomplete. So I think changing the conversation around that, and I feel like this is so much of what I see in practice, is having these conversations with adult women. And you know, to a person, everyone's like, God, I wish I had known this when I started having sex. Like, I wish there had been some container like this when I was a lot younger. So,
oh my God. Yeah, so much. You know, there's a study, and I can't remember the exact details of the study, but I think it's important to mention here that, and I'm happy to include the reference in the notes, but just about women's pleasure. And a researcher in Northern California, in Berkeley, I believe, this is just a few years ago, so it's a recent study, found that when women gathered and talked about sex for 30 minutes a week, so she put together groups of women, you know, small groups, like 5 to 10 women, and they talked about sex for 30 minutes at a time in a group setting. Their levels of pleasure rose exponentially. And also, if they were having some kind of vaginal pain or pain during intercourse, or they're anorgasmic, all of that began to diminish just from the women coming together and talking about their experience of sex. So when we talk about like shifting the cultural tide, you know, there was no intervention, by the way, by a therapist or counselor at all. It was a pure conversation, kind of like Sex in the City, kind of group of women meeting. So we know that like the bonding system and our evolutionary mechanisms wire women to want to come together and talk about their experiences. But when there's this blanket of shame over sex and we're not talking about it, it exponentiates the problem, and it perpetuates this at the level of culture where women are showing up to a sexual encounter and laying back.
Yeah.
So I want to say, as a third point, if you want to participate in a cultural shift, not only for yourself, but for all women everywhere, talk about sex.
Mm-hmm. Openly,
freely. Just follow Pamela on Facebook or Instagram, and you'll see what that looks like to talk about.
Follow Eva anywhere, and you'll see what that looks like too. Yeah, the bad and the ugly, like all of it, really, to be honest about it and to not commit to the aesthetic, to not pretend, you know, to not front as though things are going fine when in fact they're not really going fine. I think is sort of the first, it's like the tip of the wedge into the culture of shame around wanting sexual pleasure, having sexual pleasure, not having sexual pleasure, like what that might ultimately turn into, like, with just admitting what it actually is right now.
Mm-hmm.
Finding in that admitting that it's really common, you know, that it's super common, that no one, I mean, I see so many people with variations on the same story, just that it's really, no one is alone in that. So I think, yeah, to have a conversation about it is a big key. That's a beautiful research. I want to see that.
Yeah. I'll share the reference. Well, and again, that gets me excited about Path to Pleasure, because that's exactly what we do as women, as we come together and we talk about sex, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything around sex. And I find that, again, even just with little intervention with women, just coming forward with the truth of their experience, not hiding anything, that it cracks that shell of shame. And it begins to open the mind, open the nervous system, open the body to what else could be possible when it comes to sex.
Right.
And yeah. And, you know, certain cultural trends that kind of get under my skin, like this thing about squirting has become so big. And now there's so many women who come to me and say, I want to learn how to squirt, or I don't squirt, what's wrong with me? And there's this tendency for women to, hi puppy, to compare side by side, like, am I doing this right? Am I having sex right? Am I orgasming right?
Right.
Yeah, I'm sure, I'm sure you hear this a lot as well. I had a client who recently came to me and said, you know, all these years I thought I was orgasmic, but then I heard a girlfriend describe orgasm. And what she experiences is not at all what I experience. And so I don't think I've ever had an orgasm. And now I'm 40. And I feel like I've been living a lie my whole life because, my orgasm doesn't look like her orgasm. So something's wrong with me.
Right.
There tends to be like such an automatic default setting for women to go to, I'm broken, I'm bad, I'm wrong. So how do you counteract that in your practice?
I think by coming back to the body and by coming back to actually like what feels good, and just sort of redefining orgasm as being other than climax. Climax is not orgasm. Climax is one part of orgasm, but that sex and the sex with oneself or sex with partners isn't necessarily a thing that responds well to being oriented to a goal, like wanting to get somewhere, wanting to finish, or wanting to whatever it is. And the fact that for some people it does play out as orgasm as climax doesn't mean that it's that way for everyone.
Mm-hmm. So this is a question I get all the time. I'm going to present it to you. Women say, how do I communicate that to my male partner who's extremely male or goal-oriented? How do I get him to slow down and to understand that my body works differently?
I think it really depends on the man, honestly. For a really goal-oriented man, like the man who wants to fix things or do it right, I think it really has to do with changing the context of sex. And I think what you suggested about having temple night is a beautiful way to explore that. I often recommend to people that they masturbate in front of their partner so that they can see for themselves and enjoy with them what they really like and what they can do for themselves. That's a huge part of sexological bodywork training and practice is masturbation witnessing. It's introduced between partners, and it's incredibly intimate, often more intimate than partnered sex, to actually let someone see. But that again, that intimacy that is established in allowing someone to watch one masturbate is the same intimacy that one is desiring in partnered sex, and so it's a really beautiful introduction, or can be, to showing a person what you like, what your what else with a really goal-oriented fix-it man.
So I'll tell you what I say.
Yeah, please.
And this is how I coach women that I work with, is to first of all, to understand, like you said, that there's a difference between orgasm and climax, and the vast majority of women and men don't know this. So we don't have time to go into that here, but just suffice to say there's a climactic experience that we call climax, and then orgasm I want you to think of as more of a wave. It's a wave of pleasure that waves up and down and up and down and up and down. And when we allow our bodies to naturally wave and just follow the kind of the magic carpet ride of arousal, that it naturally will rise and lower, just like a wave in an ocean. And I suggest telling your partner that before you even make love. Or maybe if you've been with somebody for a long time already, but you're exploring this new definition of orgasm, to let him know in advance, look, I might wave. And I experience orgasm in this way. I wave up, I wave down. It's like little mini orgasms again and again and again and again. So if you see me in that kind of process in my body or my breath or my emotion, just know that I'm having a good time and I'm really enjoying it. But I might not climax in the same way that you do. Mm-hmm. But I'd love to keep talking about that. And please ask me if you're not sure about what's happening in my body.
Great. That's great. That's lovely.
Yeah. All right.
In either case, it's the sort of, go sit down. I think it's the sort of honest revelation. Sit down. There's a puppy.
Yeah. Yeah, sweet.
It's the honest revelation, whether it's verbal or showing, that kind of lets a partner in on what actually is desired and what actually is working well, feeling good.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay. So I feel like we could go on and on about this topic, and there's so many ways that women can begin to close the pleasure gap. But I just want to recap the 3 main points that we made sure we wanted women to know today. And that was to, number 1, know yourself. To be aware not only of your body and your own arousal system. Most women don't know anything about their own anatomy, as I'm sure you know as well. We don't know much about our own anatomy, and we don't know much about our own arousal system. Not that it's our fault, but it's because there's no education about it. And so much has literally been left out of textbooks. So getting a progressive education about your body, and then also coming to really partner with your own erotic being. Allowing yourself to taste and sample and experience what turns you on, what lights up your body, and become a kind of pleasure researcher. And just take a look around you and allow yourself to savor and sample and indulge and enjoy in different things, even at the level of fantasy. Because in order to communicate what you want from a partner, we have to know what we want first, right? So that self-exploration is important. Yeah. Anything to add there? No. Okay, perfect. So key number 2 was communication, skillful communication. Knowing how to flirt your request with your partner, and to not create a litany of complaints, but go to someone perhaps outside of your partner and do your complaining, so that you can come into the conversation with your partner, whether it's a long-term partner or just a short-term lover, and communicate with love and with compassion and integrity. And
definitely.
have those, and definitely what?
Definitely complain, definitely have your feelings.
Okay.
But don't necessarily all of them with your partner.
Yeah, great. And have those conversations before you go into lovemaking. Like sit down and have your container, sit down and with your partner and say, hey, there's a couple things I want to share with you. That is now an okay time. I want to, I really want to juice up our connection and have a great time with you. And there's a couple things I want to talk about first. Cool. All right. Key number 3 was about the cultural context and having permission. So we talked about talking with your girlfriends about sex. Or any friends for that matter. Talk to lots of men about sex. Talk to everybody about sex. And the more that you lead the way and talk openly about your experience, the more we begin to shift the culture together. And the research tells us that women actually experience more pleasure when they talk openly about sex. Cool.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that last key is just to recognize that this culture where men are supposed to take and women are supposed to give in this way is a choice that we're all making from both sides, and that to continue to do that is a great disservice to men and to women. I don't believe that it is men's desire to dehumanize women or to to take at that level from anyone, and I don't believe that it serves women to give at that level and to never ask for what they want, ask for what we want. And so just to recognize that there is a larger cultural conversation that really extends to every aspect of life. Sex is a microcosm of it, and a very beautifully revealed one. It's a very direct and intimate one, but that this plays out across all areas and is worth discussing and worth looking at across the board.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm so glad we're having this conversation. Yes. Okay, so where you can find Pamela. She has an incredible, incredible weekend coming up, and I want to let her say a few words about that and where you can find more of her. I emphatically recommend that you dive into her world and get some of her magic.
My website, which has all of this information, so everyone has it, is www.embodywwork.la. I teach one hands-on training. It's coming up in Los Angeles. It's a 4-day training, and it will happen in the very last weekend of June. I think it's June 28th through July 1st. You can contact me through the website or through Facebook if you're interested. It is an exploration over 4 days of the connections between the pelvis and the jaw, the physiological and sensational connections between the external and the internal pelvis and the external and internal jaw and neck and throat. It's super amazing. I also teach monthly a class called Take Back the Speculum, which is basically a crash course adult female anatomy class, external and internal anatomy, and then showing people with vulvas how to take back the speculum, how to use a speculum to see their own cervix. And this is particularly wonderful for anyone who's never seen their own cervix, I'm going to make sure it's a little bit less loud. Anyone who has felt like that's the domain of a doctor or another medical caregiver, to only be the only person who can have that kind of revelatory ability. It's a wonderful thing to have, and everyone goes home able to do that, and able to go into any gynecological appointment in the future and say, thank you, I've got this, and to be able to do that for oneself and to kind of take control of a doctor's care a little bit more as a doctor who is someone who works for you.
Yes. Oh my God, I love that. A doctor is someone who works for you.
Yeah. And can be fired accordingly if they don't do it.
Yes. I always say, like, you are the consumer.
Mm-hmm.
We are consumers of our doctors. So thank you for that, Pamela. I want everyone to come and just learn from you. Just sit at your feet and learn. And likewise, certainly you can come and sit at her feet and learn as well in the Path to Pleasure. So I'll include a link again in the comments, and we are enrolling now. So if you're interested in going deeper into pleasure or orgasm and all things about women's bodies and liberating our eros, then please come and join us and take a look at this program. I really love it. thepathtopleasure.com. And all right, much love, everybody. Thank you, Pamela, for having this little jam with me. And yeah, I just love you, woman. Yes, more. Okay, bye, everybody. Go talk about sex.